Y'all, y'all, y'all ready for this? Yeah.
Hey, welcome to Trainable, the video podcast where we all engage in radical, honest conversations to simplify, socialise and kickstart our wellbeing journey. Join me as I'll chat with experts from various fields from all around the world, together with mates and everyday people like you and me. Together, we'll unravel the challenges we face in our daily lives and extract those valuable, trainable insights, cutting through all that noise out there in the industry. Think of Trainable as your virtual dinner party where we break down the complexity without the need for a PhD and focus on taking those simple steps to become better than we were yesterday. We're all on our unique journeys and there's so much to learn from each other. I can't wait to share these enlightening conversations with you. Okay, welcome gents. Brock, Paul, thanks for coming in today. Really appreciate it. Interesting topic today. I think I sit here maybe 12 months ago and even the thought of discussing psychedelics would have been something that I probably it wouldn't have even been my vocabulary at that stage at the moment as well. And I think, I watched How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan, and then that kind of set me on this pretty amazing journey, which we kind of find ourselves here today. And Paul, we're obviously in Colorado recently for the Psychedelic Conference, Science Conference, and like 13,000 people there. It was pretty extraordinary. I think part of it's been around just the preconceptions around what psychedelics are. And I think about like the counterculture back in the 60s. And then you hear all these different messages that come through. And then I think my whole opinion of this is just shifted 360 in the last kind of 12 months. But Paul, I look at you're the head of clinical psychedelic lab at Monash University. You've got an honours degree in neuroscience and a PhD in psychology. I think you hold the brains in the room for today. Sorry, Brock.
Definitely.
But I mean, how on earth did you actually kind of find yourself into psychedelics, and has it been a journey for you around your preconceptions and what psychedelics is as well?
Yeah, it's been a strange and wild ride. I mean, only a few years ago, I was feeling a bit stupid for deciding to specialize in a field that didn't exist. And really what it felt like was history just rolled up beside me and I was already, engaged or, I was on my board when the wave grew, to use another metaphor. But I've had an interest in these kind of altered state experiences and peak type states and their utility for treating mental illness for many years. And can probably trace things back to being a young kid and having this interest in contemplative practice and, meditation and just wondering what the potential of the human mind is. My PhD had a focus on altered states and wasn't particularly focused on psychedelics, although that was one of the so-called induction methods. There's lots of weird and wonderful ways to produce these altered states. It just so happens that consuming what we call a serotonergic agonist is the most potent and reliable way to do it. And it's not to say that they're all the same. The altered states that can be produced through, running for 24 hours without stopping or meditating at length or the like. These are somewhat different states, but there's a lot in common, and there are all kinds of interesting ways in which there's utility for mental health treatment. But by the time I finished my PhD, I could see that psychedelic science was a happening thing again, although it was a real tiny little cottage industry. I mean, only a few years ago, mostly there was no awareness in the public. Mostly it was a stigmatized topic. And there were only a couple of groups around the world doing this work. So, I got my lab up in 2020. The first Australian trial commenced just the year before that. And now we have something in the order of about 30 trials in Australia that are funded or active, hundreds around the world, hundreds of companies around the world engaged in this work. It's a wild time. I sometimes say, and I really feel it on a daily basis, like I work at this strange interface between stigma and hype. right in the middle.
It's interesting. It's like any emerging industry as well, and that becomes confusing for people out there as well. When we talk about psychedelics, can you just kind of explain for a layman, like I had no idea around this 12 months, when we talk about psychedelics, what does that actually mean?
Yeah.
And I guess the different forms of psychedelics as well.
Yeah, well, it's an ever-expanding umbrella term, taking in more and more different kinds of compounds that typically weren't thought of as psychedelics. Um, and these compounds are, they derive from animal, fungi, plant, and synthetic sources. There's a wide variety. Um, and now we typically will refer to something like the classic psychedelics, which include compounds like LSD
Yep.
and DMT and psilocybin, the active ingredient in magic mushrooms, as distinct from the broader category of psychedelics or psychedelic-like compounds, which even take in things like MDMA and ketamine and ibogaine. So there are a whole set of different drugs out there, but I think to kind of try to understand what it is when we're referring to psychedelics, I think it's best to refer to the etymology of the word, which means from the ancient Greek mind manifesting. That is, these are compounds that I think they do a few things. They produce altered states of consciousness.
Yep.
And I say that kind of flippantly because it's just my day job, but like, my God, that is quite a thing, an altered state of consciousness. And what it is fundamentally is a dramatic and notable alteration to what you might think of as the backdrop of your awareness, something that you're completely unaware of. You're aware of like the contents of your consciousness, like your thoughts and your feelings and what you see and feel, but you're not aware almost ever that there is like a fabric of, subjectivity, you-ness behind it all. And then under psychedelics, that fabric alters, and when things alter, they become visible. So it can be shocking, like, oh my God, this thing that's been lurking behind my conscious awareness my entire life, I wasn't aware it was there. So psychedelics produce these altered states by changing very fundamental aspects of your consciousness. And then they also provide new knowledge. Like, this is important if you're going to define them in any way.
Yeah.
Some people refer to these as insight, although I think that's a bit of a misnomer, or new perspectives on yourself or the world or old problems. And then, crucially, those new perspectives tend to be deeply felt, and their authority endures over time. So it's a little different than, lots of altered states can produce what feels like a new perspective, but then the next day you discount it. You're like, oh God, I was just drunk, or I was just stoned, I was delusional. Yeah. Under psychedelics, the remarkable thing, and this is central to its therapeutic value, is that people feel like they're getting a perspective on reality or themselves that is a more true perspective than their sober one. This kind of like waking up out of the dream of your life.
Yeah, there's that window of neuroplasticity, right? After taking, each particular compound, and it varies from compound to compound. So that window of, I guess, learning is open, for a certain amount of period afterwards. That's right.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. So you've got this kind of new perspective on the world under the acute effects, which can be like dramatic. And then you're right, you get this, what's sometimes referred to as the afterglow period, where you feel spontaneously different, more flexible, joining dots in new ways, maybe more emotional, vulnerable, empowered. It can be all kinds of things. That typically lasts anywhere from a few days to a few weeks. And you're right, there's some interesting new research coming out to show that this may be related to what some people refer to as plasticity or greater flexibility. There's even some suggestive evidence, it's really not conclusive at all yet, that that psychedelics may open what are referred to as critical windows of learning. So when you're a kid, like if you try to teach somebody how to read when they're 20 for the first time, it's really tough.
Yes.
It's really easy if you're a young kid, and there are different ages at which you're much more capable in some learning capacity. And then we tend to move from being like, machines that emphasize learning to machines that emphasize performance as we get older. And psychedelics may offer this kind of momentary opportunity to really optimize that learning side of the spectrum between that, there really is a learning performance trade-off, or what they call exploitation trade-off.
Yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. And that also means there's some vulnerability there as well, because you can learn things that are not helpful for you.
It's fascinating because you can see that, and you just see that the mental health epidemic, which is kind of happening now, and you've got, traditional drugs that are addressing that in one or another. And there's obviously a lot of studies and reports coming out around that now as well. But also just as you're getting older as well, like you kind of, you start with a pure base, and life gives you download more and more software that you see the world in different ways. And you've got these stories that you've built about yourself along the way as well, and you often suppress those, right? And then you create an identity around that. And obviously it'll be great to hear in a sec, mate, around some of the feedback from some of the clinical studies as well, and what are some of the aha moments that people that have kind of gone through that has. But I might just say good day to Brock here as well, because I remember I was on the board in Carlton in 2012, 13, kind of around that area, 2014, and obviously we met then, kind of connected then as well. And you had such a charisma around you, and I look back and now obviously knowing what you went through as well, mate. But people often forget. I mean, you played over 150 games. You're top draft pick, I think number 5 back in the day. And I remember when we used to play against you when you were playing for Melbourne, I used to always bloody curse you. So when you actually came to the club, I was pretty rapt, and also because you're just such a top bloke. But I mean, you've gone through your own journey, and I think, you actually reached out to me when I actually came out and said that I had some struggles, which I really appreciated as well. And it's just terrific back in my life again now, mate, which is great. But maybe just, share a bit of your story as well, because I think some people kind of know about it. They see one side of Brock as the AFL player, but there was another side of you that was kind of all through that time as well, if you want to share some of that.
Yeah, well, thanks for the opportunity of having me on, mate, to talk about, something that's become extremely, such a passionate subject for me. And that's based off my mental health, experiences, and, to try and condense everything into a short amount of time as possible. I mean, I came into AFL extremely, what's the word I'm looking for? I was optimistic, but I was extremely determined to be an absolute overachiever in the fact that I only saw success as one way, and that was to be a 300 game player, to be a best and fairest, to be a premiership winner, all Australian, all those types of things, which I thought were well within my grasp to do. And anything short of that was a complete and utter failure. Going along the way, and then, I thought I was on my way to achieving those things. And then somewhere along the way, you start to experience injuries and, things sort of hold you back. And then when you have footy taken away from you, I suddenly posed the question of, what am I without footy? And I think a lot of elite athletes go through that when they leave their chosen sport, and they have this whole identity crisis. And without football, I felt extremely worthless, as a person. So I turned to things like alcohol to start with, to try and, to escape those awful feelings of self-worthlessness. I did that for a few years, and it worked for a brief period of time.
Yeah.
And then when that stopped working, drugs became a factor. I became bulimic as well, when it was put to me that I needed to lose weight basically to get back in the team. And because I'd had footy taken away from me for so long, that became a really obsessive thing for me. And a way it created this narrative in my head that it was the only way I'm going to get back in the team is if I lose weight. So food became an obsession. And then finally, I developed all of these, really unhealthy coping strategies, like drugs, like alcohol, like being bulimic. But then I got back into the side and I started playing really well. So while I was doing all those things, so that sort of reinforced to myself that what I was doing was right, because at the end of the day, I was back playing footy and my form was really good. I was managing to go out on sort of weekend benders and purge 5 or 6 nights a week on my food and play AFL footy. And then when footy stopped, everything just came, sort of crashing down. And without football there, and without that routine and structure of being an elite athlete, everything just sort of fell apart. And I made this really wise decision at the time that I wasn't going to work for 12 to 18 months because I wanted just a break of being complete free from routine, and without a job and without some type of structure in my life, things really sort of escalated really badly.
Yeah.
And I was I was abusing drugs on the daily basis, and you leave the game in a really healthy financial position. You make 10 or 11 years of being really financially well set up, and share portfolio and a property and all these types of things, and that was all gone within sort of 2 years, just because of what I was doing to myself, which is it's fine. Money's not the be all and end all. It was more about the damage, that I was doing to myself. And, I got to a point where I just couldn't do it anymore. I was trying, I was studying full time and I was working full time to try and get to a point where I had some type of job title that would give me some type of self-worth. I started as a junior analyst as my first job, and I thought that was, I was a bottom feeder. So I treated myself, accordingly. And then, I wanted to rise that corporate ladder for some type of validation, instead of being a junior analyst, being a normal analyst. And, I was just trying to do so much that it just wasn't possible. And it got to a point where I was just, I was so unhappy with myself in my life and everything that I was doing that, I wanted to end my life. And I tried to, and it was very fortunate that I was found when I was by my partner at the time. And, spent some time in the Melbourne clinic, a private psychiatric clinic, and then somewhere along the way in my recovery journey, someone told me about the therapeutic benefit of psychedelics, and I started reading about them and just became instantly obsessed and hooked. Michael Pollan's book was the first that I read, and then I read a book by a guy by the name of Joseph Tabor, The Fellowship of the River, about his experiences in training to be a Western MD, but with his indigenous culture and learning to straddle both sides of medicine, Eastern and Western, and building an ayahuasca retreat in Iquitos in Peru. And then I read Stanislav Grof's book, LSD, Doorways to the Numinous, and that was just absolutely mind-blowing. Like, I had to reread it just to make sure that I took everything in, and how I sort of correlated it to my recovery journey was I only started to get better when I really targeted the source of my issues. And that was my issues around self-worth. When I started seeing a psychologist, it was, oh no, I'll see a psych once a week and that's enough. And then when I was just prescribed antidepressants, I'll take my antidepressants and I'll see my psych once a week, and that's enough. That's gonna be okay. But until you actually get to the core of the issue, there's gonna be no healing. You might not get any worse, but you're not gonna get any better. And that's what, the stuff that I read about psychedelics was getting to. It helps people get to the absolute core of their issues. And, when you read the MAPS MDMA study and what it's doing for people with PTSD and for, the psilocybin studies for people with end of life anxiety, it's no secret that these people are actually getting better because the drugs are helping them get to a point where they're actually, getting to the core of their issues, and then they're integrating it into their everyday lives through the therapy afterwards. So, yeah.
And that seems to be what's really important with this, isn't it? Is that, there is some perceptions that, okay, there's psychedelics and then you got to do the work. I mean, at the end of the day, I guess my personal experience, it's almost like 5 years of therapy in 5 hours, right? But then you need that assisted therapy, or you need people to support you, or a framework at least to start unpacking that and making sense of all of that. It kind of gives you lessons, but unless you start to kind of work through that, it's a bit like it could just be like a roller coaster ride as well. And then you get off, and then people are looking for that again as well. So it's interesting. So, I mean, Brock, what a journey, mate. And even just catching up with you now, I know it's always still a journey of where we're at, but it feels like, if you're thinking about the big changes for you from a perception perspective now, what's been how's it helped you and how's it shifted, I guess, your views on life somehow as well?
Yeah, look, when I was, younger, I was completely headstrong, closed-minded, a bull. I thought, psychology was an absolute crock. I think that had a lot to do with my upbringing. I thought that, showing vulnerability was a sign of weakness, and admitting to any type of weakness was somehow emasculating, and these types of things. But embracing my vulnerabilities and being able to put my hand up, particularly to the people closest in my life, and say, you know what, I'm not doing okay. I need your help. That was a real turning point for me. Like, I always felt like I was a burden, to my family and to my friends, and that's why I always struggled to ask for help, because it was always like, they've got their own shit going on in their life. How selfish is it of me for them to go to them and say, you know what, I need help. Can you drop everything and help me? But at the end of the day, they're my family, they're my parents, and they absolutely love me. So I think it's, probably the big learning is just about, living holistically, and not aspiring to be something that's just, not achievable, this perfect human being. It's our imperfections that make what we are so beautiful, and endearing, and so attractive to the people, within our lives. So, people always ask me, do you regret, anything? And I don't regret anything, because, some people go, well, what do you mean you don't regret anything? Like, you've blown all your money, and, you ended up in a psychiatric clinic a couple of times. I was like, well, if I hadn't have ended up in the psychiatric clinic the second time, I wouldn't have met my current wife, who I met through someone that was there, and we wouldn't have our two kids, and that's the one thing that I've always believed in my life, is that everything happens for a reason. And, that's just a reaffirming, belief for me that, without everything that I went through, I wouldn't have, the three most important things to me in my life. And I wouldn't have the perspective on life, and the lessons that I've learned, now, without those experiences. And I think I've just come out a much better person on the other side, as a son, as a brother, as a father, as a husband. So, it's those experiences.
I don't want to hug you at the moment. That's I'm about to tear up about it.
Yeah, wonderful words of wisdom, and just hard won. Like, well done to you, because you can just hear that shining through. That you've done it tough, and you've worked hard, and you've found some jewels. And it's so interesting to hear you talk about just the common view that somehow to have issues is not ideal, and it's emasculating. When actually it takes more courage than anything to be vulnerable. Like, that's where you get to be really tough.
And that's, I do quite a bit of stuff in the space at the moment in terms of public speaking about mental health and my experiences, and that's probably one of the biggest take home issue messages, is that in such a blokey culture like Australia, where she'll be right. I grew up in a very, very blue collar family. Dad was a real hard ass, like a proper hard ass. And then and we didn't speak for a couple of years, because his views on mental health weren't exactly helpful for me and where I was at the time. And but full credit to my dad. He's turned absolute full circle, and we have an amazing relationship now. And I think probably one of the things that sort of tipped his view was one of his best mates actually got really bad depression, at one point. And he was pretty old school in the way of his thinking as well. And I think that sort of helped, Dad, change his views, a little bit. And, it's not easy to change your opinion or your views when you're sort of in your late 50s and early 60s. So I think that was, amazing by him. But, as Paul was saying, it's this, common misconception that it's somehow emasculating to talk about our problems or admit, that we're struggling, or it's
also that it's a bummer, like, because what you just described there sounds like you just said, your dad was a hard ass. You didn't speak for a while, and now you've got a beautiful relationship. And that's probably on account of like vulnerability in hard times and sharing tough shit, and that's like, why do we want to shy away from, this is the color of life, to be human. And I think this is one of the lessons of psychedelics is like radical inclusivity, that we're not just going for, one comfortable piece of experience or one joyful piece of experience, that actually there's a lot of value. It's not just about tolerating the tough stuff, that actually there's a ton of value and richness in life if you can include everything.
Yeah.
And there's no escaping up and down. Like reality has lots of
you can't have happiness without risking
exactly.
sadness, right?
Yeah.
The opposite emotions you're required for for a full and happy life, as you pointed out.
And there's something special about sadness or the tough emotions, and they can bring people together.
One of the things that Dad taught me, first about footy was you've got to learn to lose to appreciate winning. As a sportsman. So if you relate that to everything in life, you've got to have sadness to appreciate, happiness. You've got to learn, to fail to get to success or to appreciate success. You would know that as much as anyone being an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing, isn't it? Because I mean, which probably got me to a point of burnout was keeping up the facade.
Yeah.
And having an identity that you're almost not bulletproof, but you're kind of leading so many people, and also, you feel such a deep responsibility for people, I think, as well at these times where if you start to kind of show those cracks, you feel like you're letting people down. So you're kind of working through that, but as you kind of learn, that then starts to conjure other ways of your life and permeates in health. And if you're suppressing it in one way, it's a bit like water finding the ocean, isn't it? It's going to find you one way or another. And that's what I found interesting, even just through psychedelics as well. And I'm not sure, Paul, when you're looking at some of, I guess, the people that have gone through trials with groups that that have gone through trials as well, I mean, perspective seemed to be a big one that came up for me. I remember hysterically laughing at myself through it, looking at how ridiculous I placed the importance on things in life. And it was the contextualization of, where I place value versus, getting to end of life almost and looking back on life and going, why am I actually putting any importance in this? And and the analogy was almost like, it's probably a bad one, but I remember watching Lethal Weapon back in the day, and Mel Gibson's in the caravan, and he puts a video in the video cassette and watches his family playing at the beach he no longer had that. And, I kind of had an experience where I felt like that was taken away from me in a second chance now to come back, and just the importance of that and that perspective, all that stuff we're worrying about, the things that come out when you're looking at studies. It's funny, the lessons that come up and the visualizations. What are some of the consistency that is coming out, and I guess some of the benefits, particularly around, mental health and depression, that's coming out of the studies?
Yeah, no, great questions. And you made me remember a moment some months ago in our lab where one of the people that was undergoing a high-dose psilocybin experience was in hysterical laughter for, I don't know, mate, it must have been a few hours. At least we kept coming back into the corridor, and it's like, whoa, it's still happening in there. And it was just hilarious. I mean, and sometimes we hear sobbing for hours, as well. It's just phenomenal. And that's definitely a common experience. It relates to what a lot of people refer to as the overview effect, which is what astronauts have the good fortune to experience. When you can put the whole world behind your thumb and everyone you know and love and all of human history, puts things into a dramatically larger perspective. And I think psychedelics can do that for people. And you can find yourself, either finding it quite hysterical that, you were so caught up in that thing, or you can find it sad, or you can have, compassion for yourself. And ultimately that overview effect can just, help you to not get too sucked in to the troubles in your life, to just take that broader perspective on things. But there are all kinds of other perspectives that can change. Really, like, perspective's a good word for what psychedelics can do for people. There's the opportunity to take on the perspective of other people in your life, people that have even done you harm, in a way that, and if it has compassion in it, then there's a way in which people find that they're released from some tough experiences in their lives because they've been able to feel compassion for, difficult people in their lives, whether it's a, tough parent or a perpetrator of a crime.
Yes.
the even potentially more radical step is having that kind of experience with yourself. Because we tend to be our worst enemies. And so if you can kind of find a way to feel genuine self-compassion and forgive yourself and, acknowledge things that are tough that you've never been able to acknowledge properly, that can be very relieving. But there are all kinds of, interesting, what people might refer to as insights, which is like a perspective shift, but it can come with, it's not just about seeing something from another perspective. It can have, genuinely new creative content in the mix. And what's fascinating is, and there's so many fascinating things in this space, it's endless. One of the things that I have noticed over years, and this plays out in some of the clinical trial experience we have as well, is that psychedelic experience, which involves this profound altered state of consciousness, often has like a lot of what you might call visionary elements to it. You might be reliving your past. You might be reliving another planet that you've never been on. It might be some interesting montage of it all. But like there's a kind of story playing out often. And maybe there's multiple stories, and they sometimes are fractilian, and one feeds into the next. But there's often a story, and you have a part. It's like you're acting out a part in some grand visionary landscape of activity. And what often I'm hearing reported is that people discover, sometime often at the end of their trip session, towards the end, or maybe the next day, or maybe the next week, that this whole kind of montage or kind of visionary landscape that played out over many hours had this unbelievably perfect lesson for them in life. And they were playing a bit part in that lesson, but they were unwitting. Like they did not know that they were playing a perfect part for themselves to teach themselves a lesson. It's kind of phenomenal.
It's amazing.
So you get all kinds of things. You get just unbelievable kind of metaphoric dreamscapes that emerge where people just get a huge amount of insight about their lives or what's driving the issue. And this kind of, another thing that's often, reported, and, people don't appreciate that this is like a part of the process, is that people are often surprised by what they encounter under psychedelic experience. Actually, you should expect if an experience is that helpful for your mental health, you should expect to be surprised.
Yes.
It's like the old Einstein quote that the system that makes the problem can't fix it. Yeah.
Yes.
And so if you've been trying with your therapist or your psychiatrist or your friends for 30 years and you're still struggling, okay, if there's going to be a solution, you're bound to be a bit like, whoa, didn't think it was that.
So true.
And so often like what it is that ails you is surprising, and the way out is surprising. And that's one of the great gifts of psychedelic experience when it happens well, is that, you can move from spinning wheels or banging your head against something that's just not working, even if you're trying, to, I often think of it as compass setting. Like it's not the vehicle, for some people there's enough motivation in that compass that like they're off on their way. But it is a compass. It kind of sets a course, and you can feel it's reliable. You can trust it, and then you need a vehicle. And that vehicle could be a psychotherapist, could be your wife or your friends, could be just good lifestyle and meditating and eating and playing sport or whatever it is, or little simple practices, being kind. But that ability to have a compass that you feel you can rely on. Maybe you need to course correct sometimes. Maybe you need to like check that compass, calibrate from time to time with additional psychedelic experience. But that is incredibly valuable because it's moving you from like potentially from like profound inefficiency to profound efficiency.
Do you find, I don't know, Brock, if you experienced this as well, and any of, I guess, people that have gone through those trials as well, Paul, but this, we live in a world which we're most connected we've ever been from a digital perspective, right? But, depression and anxieties, at an all-time high. You just think about even men's health around one of the leading, factors of death is suicide now as well. So as much as we're so connected digitally, we are feeling so alone. And one of the overpowering feelings I had from the experience was interconnectedness, right? And my empathy for others, being that I feel like I am part of a collective in some senses without going in trying to unpack all of that. And I think it makes you view the world differently as well, and you can live your life with more empathy. And it feels like at the moment the world's anything but that in some ways as well. I don't know, Brock, did you get a sense of any of that through your experience? And Paul, does anyone pop out and say anything similar to that?
Look, empathy's one thing that I've never naturally struggled with.
Yeah.
I think I've always been really empathetic, and when I was always willing to put everyone else's well-being and happiness and my attention towards them if they need it before myself. And one of the first things that I got taught in the Melbourne clinic was like the announcement that comes over when you're doing the safety announcement on the aeroplane is, you've got to put your own mask on first before you can help, sort of other people. But yeah, certainly one of my experiences, and we chatted about this the other day, Ryan, was when I started to experience really bad anxiety after I'd gotten, to a point where I was really healthy and happy because I was, I think Bonnie was on the way, and I started to get anxiety about, shit, what if I get back to that, that place again where I'm not well and I can't provide, and I can't even look after myself, let alone a kid. So I had an experience where I'm very sort of disciplined with my, from all the literature that I've read, you set an intention and that you journal and you eat cleanly for a couple of weeks, and you make sure that you're in the right mindset. And I had an experience where I got this. It wasn't like the world or the universe spoke to me, but I could sort of feel its message, telepathically.
Yes.
And then it was saying, as long as you're a good human being, the universe will look after you. And my take-home message from that was, well, within my universe, I can be the best father that I can be. I can be the best brother that I can be, the best husband that I can be, the best son that I can be, and the best, human being to, or friend or stranger. And that was the take-home message, that I got from that. And any of those times where I feel like, I still have my down days, I've been diagnosed with bipolar, so I am going to have, sort of mood swings from time to time, as I really remember that message, and it helps me, every single time.
It's profound in that. And you brought up a good point, mate, around the preparation. And I think, Paul, people will be listening at home kind of thinking, okay, the guys are talking about psychedelics. What does it mean? Can you just maybe walk through, a therapy-assisted session? Generally, what happens, music, how long would it normally take? Can you just kind of share some of that so someone actually gets to actually understand what we're actually talking about today?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and in the same breath, I guess I want to maybe bring in a cautionary note, because here we are talking about some of the tremendous value of psychedelic experience, and it sounds like you both have been impacted in positive ways by your experience, and we see this, every day of the week in our lab. But it is worth saying that while the classic psychedelics like psilocybin and LSD, and even drugs like MDMA are generally very safe physiologically, there are some very real psychological risks.
Sure.
And that's what you would expect if you have a class of drugs that pretty reliably brings you very close to the sources of your distress. That can be destabilizing. That may not be a good thing if you're not ready for that.
I've heard you use the term non-specific amplifiers.
That's
before.
A Groffian term. Yes. Yeah, that's right. So I think that term is only partially true. Stan Grof used that term to describe psychedelics as drugs that amplify whatever is there. So if you're a little bit suspicious of the people around you, you might become extremely paranoid under psychedelics. Or if you're a little bit sad, you might, become weepingly distraught. Or if you're a bit happy, you might get cheerful. I think that's part of it. I think there is a whole set of specific changes, that is changes that you can see quite consistently across different individuals in different contexts. But to kind of come to your question, Ryan, about the process in in these trials, it's worth saying that we're using the term psychedelics and we're referring to psychedelics, but in my view, actually what the research trials are testing and what I think we need to lean much more heavily into is a form of augmented psychotherapy.
Yes.
Yes, there's a drug involved, but the psychotherapy is just as important in my view. In fact, I think it's underemphasized, and I think we'll get much better results in the longer term if we do more to emphasize the psychotherapeutic part of it.
Yes.
And that's how trials look. I mean, most trials look like quite a lot of psychotherapy sessions with just a couple, 1, 2, or 3 drug-assisted sessions. In the trials as well, we have quite a procedure around screening.
Yes.
Multiple stages in screening. So the people that actually get access to all the trials around the world, including ours at Monash, and including the future clinics that are going to be opening up in Australia soon, these are people who have gone through, some pretty rigorous steps in screening that include psychiatric screening, that include physical screening and blood works and all sorts. Now, it's not to say that the kinds of people that get access to these trials are the only kinds of people who would benefit or the only kinds of people that are safe. In fact, I think it's far from that. The vast majority of people don't make it into these trials, and I think we need to work to increase access. And that involves moving from this understandable position in the early days of an abundance of caution to incrementally test out the safety parameters and the use cases. So we do screen, and then we also move into pretty intensive psychotherapy. And our psychotherapists are, wonderful people and very qualified and trained in psychedelics. And we even have the good fortune that quite a number of our therapists had the opportunity to have high-dose psychedelics as part of their training. That was a world-first study that we did. And we assessed whether that was...
Was that really helpful for them?
Yeah, that was. We assessed this. So this was a scientific study to understand whether psychedelic-assisted training is a good idea and how to do it.
It makes sense though, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, if you're going to be out there kind of leading someone through it, to
actually know what you're talking about,
exactly.
right? Yeah, you're not talking about it from a theoretical perspective.
Right. And more than know what you're talking about, because most of the time you can't talk, to be able to attune to the person who's lying there on the couch or the person who's sobbing or crying, and that person feels like you got them.
Yeah.
That look in the eye, like, I know where you are. Maybe you can't know entirely. You can't impose your preconceptions, but you can have that shared understanding. It's a little bit like, the analogy that's often used is the guide. This is not quite, a guided trip, but if you wanted somebody to accompany you on some foreign planet, and they were going to assist you and they'll be there to help you if things get tough, you'd like it if they'd been there before.
Yeah, sure.
And this is what we also we assessed. I know we're going on a tangent here. I'll come back to your question, but we assessed not only the potential utility of high-dose psilocybin for our therapists in training and what kinds of competencies they think were improved through that process. We also asked their clinical patients in the trials that they work in what their views were of their therapists having psychedelics. And, no surprises. The vast majority really want their therapist to have had a psychedelic experience, and they take a lot of comfort. Almost everybody asks their therapist, have you done this? And until, trials like this have come online, a lot of therapists who have worked in this space, it's been a small industry and a small group of researchers to date, but a lot of therapists have had their psychedelic experience, but they had it in some manner in which they couldn't speak about because it was quote unquote illegal. And so it's really nice to be able to move from that kind of rather immature quandary, which is undermining therapeutic alliance. You want to be honest with the people that are seeking your help, and it's a tough situation for a therapist to be in, to not be able to answer honestly about that. So it's wonderful in this case that for lots of reasons, including that you can kind of say to the person who will invariably ask you, I've done this and I've been there.
Have you been able to tease out any data around the importance of that therapeutic alliance yet? Are there any studies underway with?
Yeah, so we're looking at it in some of our ongoing studies, and there have been a few studies published in the last couple of years, one in particular from Imperial College that showed actually that therapeutic alliance was like a very important factor in beneficial outcomes in the end. Yeah. Which is the case across all therapies.
Yeah, I was just about it related to, to mine as well. Like if
Yeah.
you're not actually, connecting,
Yeah.
with your therapist, then it actually makes sense that, if you want to open up to someone
right.
and actually feel, completely safe,
That's
to
right.
be vulnerable, then, it's just more so the interest if there was any actually data sort of
Yes, there
confirming that.
is some emerging, and it's pretty clear that that's an important factor. In fact, it actually, because of the ways in which psychedelics can enhance or augment problematic relational dynamics through things like paranoia, or what therapists refer to as transference, where I'm dealing with some issue and I project it onto our relationship in some way. Because of these factors, we consider at least a good degree of rapport and alliance to be like an eligibility criteria. Like we won't proceed if we feel like there isn't trust. Because you're going into a situation where trust is probably one of the most important factors to optimize in the prep phase.
Absolutely.
Because lack of trust is the precondition for a quote unquote bad trip. And a bad trip is not fun, and it's also not useful for your mental health. It can really put you in the opposite direction.
I guess, from my limited experience is that you need to surrender in these situations as well. And if you don't have that trust, you may not necessarily get all the full benefit of actually going through that experience. So I'll pull you back in, mate. So if someone comes and they're actually experiencing it, can you paint the picture of what actually happens?
What they go through, So different trials are different. So, but
say even with the people that went, the clinicians who went through it, and
they went through a very truncated treatment. It wasn't really a clinical treatment. It was more like a psychedelic exposure with support. But the clinical trials will typically have something like this, where you'll have perhaps 3 or 4 psychotherapy sessions. Usually with 2 therapists. So usually the same 2 therapists will track you through the whole course of treatment. And after you've done those 3 or 4 sessions, then you'll move into a dosing day, and it's a full day affair. And then you'll have...
So when you're saying dosing day, generally how would someone take it generally?
So what's normally happening in our lab, it's invariably a capsule in almost every trial. It's a capsule of medical grade drug. And... so somebody will arrive in the morning at our lab. We'll do a number of preliminary check-ins and tests. We have to check, we do urine drug tests and urine pregnancy tests where relevant. And there are a few things to do in the first hour of the day, administrative things and forms and a few surveys. And then we set a therapeutic container, and then the participant will ingest the drug. And it's usually a little capsule or 2. And then we set up the rooms to be, very comfortable, more like a retreat or a living room than a clinical space, because of the non-specific amplification bit. That if you start to have a tough time and you start to get paranoid, and you're in a white room with lights on you, you might think that it's an alien abduction and they're going to operate or something. So the person will typically put on headphones. There's a playlist that's curated for the duration of the trip.
And just run through that, because if someone would be interested. So that playlist, how is that playlist curated?
Every group has got their own systems and their own approaches. There's no science to it. There have been a couple of studies that have looked at playlists, and
someone out of John Hopkins had some good playlists there as well.
And there's been some studies comparing playlists. I don't think there may be a science to it, down the track, but for now, really, it's kind of intuition and therapeutic sense. We have a number of options. So we have like a playlist that's got phases that are related to the arc of the trip. My view is I hew pretty close to this, what's referred to as patient centric or non-directive approach, which is to say, we set up the preconditions for a useful experience. We try to equip people with skills. We, try to, commence the whole process with the right mindset and the right conducive physical setting. But then really, we're really amateurs as compared to the real therapist in the room, which is the relationship between a person's mind and the psychedelic trip.
Yes.
And so we don't try and direct and curate and move things around too much, because typically that's a disruption to something very surprising and very useful that's happening. And the same, I think, can apply to the playlist. If you have a playlist that is too loud or too attention grabbing or has lots of words in it in your language or whatever, then what can end up happening is you're just kind of moving through like a synesthetic landscape of like watching a movie or something, which can be fun and interesting, but it's probably going to take you away from like the stuff you need to deal with.
Sure.
So it's a little bit like if you think about the time-tested indigenous practices around music support for psychedelics, you have things like practices like the Icaros in Amazon.
The ayahuasca where they sing it, Icaros to when they're looking at the person under the influence, and
that's
it's
right.
Fascinating, that stuff.
Yeah, but if you listen to an Icaros, which you can listen to, the recorded Icaros, it's typically, most of it is quite light on.
Yes.
You might have a single voice or a single shaker or a little bit of guitar or a whistle. It's there, but you might forget it's there for 3 hours. It's like a golden thread, and if you're in trouble, you can reach out. There it is in your mind. The shaman is singing. And so that, that's whatever. That's my, hot take on good playlists, at least for the peak cruising altitude phase. On the way up, it's great to be able to open your heart. On the way down, it's great to be able to land with positivity. And there's different kinds of, exactly. Soften the landing. But so people will lie down, headphones, eye masks, comfortable couch, couple of therapists.
General duration would be?
Therapeutic intention. The duration of a psilocybin dose day is in the order of 7 or 8 hours.
Yes.
Similar for MDMA, when we use the dosing regimen that is mostly used in MDMA studies, which involves a supplemental top-up dose at about 90 minutes, 2 hours. Then you get the longer peak phase. Otherwise, it's quicker up and down. LSDs are longer. One of the reasons why LSD's fallen, it's not out of favor, but it's certainly not the flagship classic psychedelic like it was in the 50s and 60s. But one of the reasons is it doesn't fit into the working day.
Scalability is a massive issue.
Long day.
Right?
Yeah, about 10 hours, 12 hours, and it's a real slow land often with LSD. You come in real slow and you can't quite put the aircraft down for some hours. So people go through that process, and then they have a support person, a close person that picks them up and takes them home, and hopefully have a pretty supportive sanctuary-like environment at home. But not everybody has that luxury. Some people, find it a bit tricky coming back into their regular life that day. And that's one. We've learned a lot about what are called on-ramps and off-ramps, into and out of psychedelic trip sessions and into and out of the whole treatment arc. These are tricky things to manage, on-ramps and off-ramps. And that's, there really is a case to be made for psychedelic experience in a retreat-like context or a therapeutic community or somehow a bit out of your life.
Yes.
Because it is tough, even if, your loving kids are climbing over your head at the end of the day, it's still tough,
It's so true.
Yeah.
Can you just, I think people are probably interested in psilocybin and MDMA.
Yeah.
Obviously can move, can get you to two different places potentially, or be addressing this amazing stuff with MDMA, with ex-military kind of returning service people, through the US. And is there anything there you can kind of help just shape people's views around the difference of those channels?
Sure. And I neglected to finish answering the previous question, which is to say that in our trials, in most trials, we have multiple, usually 2 or 3 dosing sessions and multiple therapy sessions between them. So just to let you know,
so it's
a course of treatment over.
Do you increase the
dose?
The dose each time?
In some of our trials, we do, It depends, unless contraindicated. But it's a course of treatment typically over, 10 to 15 weeks.
Okay.
And that's, it's certainly different than just, self-medicating and popping some, LSD and going to your room. It's really like a big piece of work.
Yes.
So again, a note of caution around, the research evidence that says psychedelic-assisted therapy is potentially safe. It's got promising signals in terms of being effective. Yeah, true, when people are really adequately screened and when there's a substantive piece of psychotherapy across it. Taking psychedelics on your own in the wild or wherever you do it, may not correspond to that kind of safety and efficacy profile. So you need to really use caution in prepping up for anything. So to your question about distinctions between MDMA and psilocybin, so MDMA-assisted therapy is very likely to be the first approved psychedelic treatment, possibly by 2024. So the group leading the charge on that one is the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, and you and I met at that conference in Colorado that they put on, which was tremendous. And and just worth saying, at Monash, we've just opened up recruitment on an MDMA PTSD trial specifically for military veterans and first responders.
Amazing.
So anybody who would like to find out more information about that trial can go to our Monash website.
And what's that website?
Oh gosh, the URL is, let me remember it. It's monash.edu /psychedelics.
Sure.
So, and we're recruiting for a number of other trials as well. The difference between psilocybin, which is a classic psychedelic, a little like LSD, and MDMA is quite a substantial difference. MDMA you could think of as being a drug that dramatically increases your tolerance for distress. That is, things don't bother you as much.
Is that because of the activity gets turned down in the amygdala?
Yeah,
and the
that's
activity
right.
in the prefrontal cortex gets turned up?
Yeah, well done. That's it. That's right. So your basic kind of flight, fight, fear response that is, it really depends a lot on amygdala activity, is dampened down. You're no longer as vigilant. You're no longer as easily distressed. But unlike a drug like heroin, which also has that in common, MDMA's got an amphetamine component to it as well. So it's activating, it's engaging. So you don't like, fall out of, the situation into some blissful, heroin type state. It's quite different. You feel curious, you feel interested in other people, you feel interested in yourself, and that's good for therapy. And so, interestingly, I feel like MDMA and psilocybin can get people to some similar places, but through kind of a different pathway. MDMA allows you to access typically avoided material. And that process of accessing that avoided material, whether it's a memory or just an experience or a belief or whatever it is, being able to sit with that allows you to notice things and have new perspectives on things, and all kinds of new realizations emerge. With the classic psychedelics like psilocybin, it's a little bit more like the pathway there is more like new perspectives are kind of being hoisted upon you. It's like these parts of your brain that typically don't talk to each other are getting linked up, and suddenly, pop, you're you got a new perspective, or you're realizing something that you hadn't realized before. And then, through that process of realization, you can find in a psilocybin experience a really heart-opening place where people realize, oh gosh, I've been constraining my view of reality, through this narrow aperture that is built out of anxiety. This is a kind of common experience. And then through MDMA, even though the kind of initial feeling is a lowering of anxiety, what can come of that is a sense of just a rolling sense of insights and new perspectives on life. One of the phenomenal things is if you, and this we're talking about mental illness and people in distress and obviously difficult experiences or situations, but there is a growing literature and certainly a huge practice in the world. Hundreds of thousands of people every year in around the world are learning and experiencing that psychedelics can be useful for people who are quote unquote well.
Yes.
And one of the things that is commonly reported is that when you have a profound relief, of anxiety, when anxiety drops profoundly, you can realize that, even if you're well and highly functioning, that you're actually anxious all the time. It's actually a backdrop to to our awareness, and it's what we inherit. It's our birthright. We're an animal in a tough world, and we need to survive. And but that's a phenomenal realization that you are constraining your view of the world and the way in which you behave and the way in which you relate to everybody through your need to survive and your anxiety about that, even if you feel top of the world. And you were saying that. I mean, you were top of the world at one point, AFL, footy legend, doing well. But behind that was probably a lurking shadow, which is like you had to do well. Your status, your worth, everything depended on it. So even while you're top of the world, it's under threat.
Yeah,
at all times.
And I think what you were talking about before is just we've almost been conditioned that the only way to measure success or importance is to have the good job title or to have the nice car or the good house, and we constantly aspire to get these things, even though now that there's so much research around says that they don't contribute one bit to our happiness, right? But
once you've got the basics, you've got to have the basics. That helps with happiness. And then
exactly right. So it's an interesting one. But I mean, just getting back to the MDMA, and the effect that it has on our brain. I remember, hearing Rick Doblin, he was doing a TED talk, I think, and he was speaking about, the effect, how it operates within the brain and how, why it's so successful with so many sort of former soldiers who are struggling with PTSDs, that it's allowing them to relive these memories that they're trying to suppress without the emotions attached to them. And he used one former soldier as an example, and he was refusing to let go of his war memories because two of his best mates were killed in the war. And then under his MDMA assisted therapy session, they came to him in his experience or in his vision. They said, you need to let us go and sort of get on with your life. And that was like the real turning point, for him. So. I think now he's back in the country that he went to, that he was fighting the war in. He's helping, sort of refugees or children who had lost their parents in that war, sort of, get on with their lives. So, that's, some of the powerful experiences that you hear of. And, I think as governments, right, like we ask our soldiers to go and fight these wars for us, to keep us safe and to keep us, give us freedoms. Like the minimal thing that we can do for them when they return home is provide them or expand our treatment options that, but it's not going to work for everyone. Like the studies say that, the phase 3 trials say that it only works for 2/3, so it's not going to work for everyone. But if it works for 2/3 of those soldiers, then that's better than, no thirds or the current treatment options that we have, which are, a lot of them prove to be really ineffective.
It's interesting. Like when we were in Colorado, I made the intention each day is that when people are sitting next to me, like I'm going to, really engage and understand. And I can't tell you how many different stories, people were either suicidal or they were, return service people, or that their children's were. And it was just, I could just see with that 13,000 people there, 500 concurrent sessions, some of the leading doctors in the world. It feels like, this moment is an inflection point for this now and being legitimized, for very good reason as well. But I think your point's really well made. Both of your points is that, it isn't for everybody and it isn't a silver bullet and, and we shouldn't be treating it that way. But it is one way that we should be thinking about as the potential in all of it. And I guess having had that experience, I think, one of the challenges I've had in my life is really caring what people think.
Yeah.
Right. And the awakening of when you're, again, with the support that, really, and sometimes we all know it, but it just puts it so sharp that we're here for such a short period of time. And you get this bit of perspective at these moments where you could be doing, lots of work on yourself, but it just conjures up with such clarity. And then it is just what you do with that becomes, I guess, really important from here. But I mean, part of this podcast is to kind of simplify, talking about it, socialize, and just kind of discuss as relatable as we can. And then, I guess people now, part of it is not start, but is this something that I should be considering, or is this something I need to be researching in more? Is it for me or is it not for me? if someone's sitting at home thinking about this at the moment, what's some of the areas? I think Michael Pollan, How to Change Your Mind. If you've just got Netflix at home, I think it's a fantastic entree into this. It's not everything, but it's a good entree. Where do people go, Paul? And what's the framework, do you think, of people just thinking around this as a potential?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a good question. And currently in Australia, we've got this rather unprecedented opportunity with these new clinics that may be able to open over the coming months and years.
Because the TGA now has approved, right?
Right, so it's complicated.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Can you explain that? Because there's a lot of media out there saying now, it's been approved, obviously with assisted therapy. Yeah. Can you just explain that for people?
Yeah, sure. So, there's been a lot of frustration over many years, from people who have wanted to access the trials. And, there's only a very small number of people that can access these trials. And now with these new, with this down scheduling, there may be an opportunity for a greater number of people to get treated, which is great. Although it's worth saying, to your question, what should people do when they start to think, is this for me? Yes, absolutely. Researching is important. Speaking to professionals who know what they're talking about in this regard is important as well.
Absolutely.
And trying to find whether it's appropriate for you, and then going through a process that is, just solid and ethical, rigorous, and evidence-based, and possibly if these clinics pan out the way they're intended to, that would be one avenue and pretty dramatic opening for people to gain access to this. And so what's happened is our regulator, the Therapeutic Goods Administration, changed the way that MDMA and psilocybin are classified from the 1st of July. They moved from being what are called prohibited substances, only to be used in clinical trials, which is what we've been doing, to what are called controlled medicines, which can only be used in certain ways by certain people, but in a service delivery context. And it's worth saying, MDMA can only be used to treat PTSD in this way.
Yes.
And psilocybin can only be used to treat treatment-resistant depression in this way by psychiatrists who have been authorized and so on. There are, a lot of people have been concerned about this moving too quickly. I got lots of sympathies for that view. It's also worth saying there are a huge number of guardrails and barriers to entry. It's not simple. It involves going through an ethics committee, and you have to set up a whole treatment protocol like what we do in trials. And it's also worth saying that, and so these haven't begun. I mean, a lot of people thought, okay, 1st of July, the law changes, it's all going to be gangbusters. Of course, it's tumbleweed for the first few months at least, because it's hard to set this stuff up. And there are only a few groups in the country that have got runs on the board. We have the largest group at Monash, and we've been working in this way for a couple of years now, every day of the week. And there are a couple of groups around the country. Most of them are relatively new to the space. And so that's fine. There's a way, there's an importance for us to assist our colleagues to school up, and there's training that's being offered. And, we brought MAPS out to Australia recently and did a MDMA therapy training. There's going to be a Monash training coming up next year. There are a number of options, and we need to assist our colleagues to school up and to put in place the right protocols. But we do have this advantage that we're starting with a team that already has quite a bit of experience, which is fantastic. It's just worth saying as well that, on the topic of these new clinics and this, world first change to the scheduling of these drugs. Now, I think we need to hold two things in mind. There's a lot of kind of media fracas about this, and I think I don't see people really understanding that you can kind of understand that on the one hand, more research is needed.
Yes.
And in addition, not just academic trials, but drug development trials and, the kind of regulatory pathway needs to be progressed in the usual fashion. And then it's also worth remembering that in 1970, when these drugs were banned, there was already at least 15 years of research that had come before that. These drugs were put into a classification system that is defined in the States as classification for drugs that have no known medical value and a high potential for abuse. That was predicated on a lie. There was research to show that wasn't the case. So in my view, the proper classification for at least the classic psychedelics, if not MDMA and a couple of others, has always been a Schedule 8 controlled medicine with, delivered in a clinical context, in a controlled setting with properly trained professionals. It should never have been scheduled alongside heroin or crack cocaine.
Yeah.
It's fascinating, isn't it? Because you go back in time, in the clinical stage, the 50s and 60s as well. Like it was classified a wonder drug back then. Funny enough, in some of the trials, and when you start to kind of research all of these things, and I guess that's what we need to be not evangelistic about it, but which is such a positive change now that science, psychedelics is catching up, and to get 13,000 people in a room in Colorado with some of the leading doctors, universities in the world talking about this openly now is obviously a great step forward. Yeah. But I guess as we kind of start to wrap up as well, I think obviously one of the things that might be good to touch on in a sec, mate, is how the scaling of this, right? Because that's the next challenge, isn't it, with any new industry or evolving industry at this stage is, we need to move forward with caution, as you said. We don't want to be evangelistic about it, yet we need to train people. Yeah. We need to, if for what Brock and I have even said today and the people that we've spoken to, there has been enormous benefits to it as well. It doesn't suit everybody, but there is some amazing benefits of this. So, I guess for you, Paul, what's the next step? And what's the rate determining step and barrier to entry now for us to be able to get this more accessible, do you think?
Yeah, good questions. And, it really is important to get it right. I would say, slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Yeah. My sense is that we need to do a couple of things now. There are a couple of key threats, in my view, to, a positive future for psychedelic therapies. One of them is to do with developing and testing best practice. Early on, Brock, you referred to the MAPS trial where, 2/3 of people responded really well and 1/3 not as well. Absolutely true. Absolutely impressive. A lot of those people were treatment resistant, but that is a particular protocol. 3 dosing sessions, 12 psychotherapy. It's a particular protocol. There could be a better protocol. Yeah. And it's not to say that this will work for everybody. That's highly implausible. But I think we've got a long way to go to, testing out and developing even better ways to do psychedelic therapy. A lot of the trials to date have been very brief in their intervention. It's always a one-size-fits-all cookie-cutter approach because that's how research works. And the pharmaceutical industry and the regulatory frameworks bias everything toward drug, towards pharmaceutical, and they're trying to get rid of the therapy. My view and the view of almost every good clinician who's doing this work is that it should be the other way around. Yeah. It's augmented psychotherapy. And that's, so what we're doing at Clarion Clinics as an example of this is we're going in the other direction. We're not looking for, the rapid fire way to get, psychedelics out and maybe have an app alongside the treatment to, keep it safe or something like that. There may be value in all kinds of approaches to this. I'm sure the future will be diverse, and that's good. But we're going the other way. We're going for a minimum 9-month duration of treatment, a couple of dosing sessions, quite a lot of psychotherapy, and then it moves into group therapy and the like. And so I think that's critical, that we don't just ossify whatever's been done in the trials because they were picked because that was the budget they had or that was some scientific question or whatever. There's a lot more to be done in getting even better outcomes than we've ever got. And that's my hope in the clinics, that we actually have this opportunity to get better outcomes than any trial has ever gotten before. And you've got to assess it, we've got to stay close to reality and to the data. So we need good, solid, transparent assessment of what we're doing.
Do you think that's where real world evidence is going to start to become more of a factor in moving forward? Like I've already read some of the stuff with, the FDA is starting to take it under more consideration than what they have been. There are a couple of other companies in the space, Amiria, who comes to mind, who historically were cannabinoid clinics. Now they're working on some drug development with MDMA molecules, and they've also bought the PAC centers to set up that infrastructure, and their focus is going to be sort of that wraparound service, right? Factoring in all the data so that we can say, well, it might not just be the drug, as you said, there might be more of the therapy, that's part of it. So do you think that's going to be a big part of the
huge
the
part of it? And I'll tell you
forward?
a number of ways in which it's a huge part of it. So we need to understand what best practice is and assess safety and efficacy. But you asked Ryan about the barrier to entry. So yes, there's training of therapists. Yes, there's fit for purpose sites. There's all of these things. But the critical barrier for entry will be cost.
Yes,
because
that's why the government needs to support that potentially, right?
And so the way that you get government on board as reimbursers is you need evidence. You need cost effectiveness evidence. And so my view is that for psychedelic therapy to fulfill its promise, which is that it is a remarkable step change in mental health outcomes for the subset of people who it's suitable for, we're going to need to show very impressive results in the longer term, because there's no way to avoid it being costly. It involves a lot of person hours over a long period of time if you do it this way. Now, there will be a trend in the other direction, moving towards a pharmaceutical-only type approach, and that may help some people in some way. But my prediction is that'll do what psychiatry has, by and large, done over the last 5 decades, which is underwhelming results for half of people and no results for the other half. So I think we need to assess. We need to firstly do a damn good job. I always say safety first, effectiveness second, cost effectiveness third. And that's critical. These drugs becoming regulatory, approved by regulators or, downscheduled, that is not the critical point at which we scale. The critical point is when it's reimbursed. And in the short term, and this is what we're working with in our clinics as well, we have a health economics unit that we're setting up that will attempt to not only assess the data and the cost effectiveness of what we're doing in the long term, and we're trying to go for gold. We're trying to really get the best possible long-term outcomes. We're also trying to work with various payers to deal with this hopefully temporary situation where in a country where we have a Medicare, this is an out-of-pocket cost. And so we need to work with insurance companies. We need to work with membership orgs. We need to work with the DVA. We need to work with trade unions. And I really welcome conversations with anybody from those kinds of groups who want to talk about how, they can improve the lives of the people that are in their care and also save themselves money in the end, hopefully.
Police unions, firefighter unions, all your first responders who experience PTSD and those types of,
Hopefully they're listening. I mean, this is my opinion, but it's just, with pharmaceuticals, you always need to be very careful around these things because obviously share prices matter and there's a few different things and, and also there's a few sacred cows out there as well, when it comes to SSRIs and these other different things out there. So I think it's how I think you put it beautifully and eloquently. It's like, we move through with caution, but we need to think about what are we actually trying to achieve with this because we don't want to just commercialize it is been fraught with danger. But Brock, I mean, I guess the last thing from you, mate, is someone's at home kind of listening as well, and I mean, maybe this is just from shared experience more than anything. And I guess today is hopefully people have picked up it's not about advocating, it's just about sharing our experience and updating and trying to demystify some of the information that's kind of out there as well. But for you, would you say what would you from the experience of using psychedelics, Brock, what would be some of the takeaways for someone at home kind of listening to your experience of it?
There's no silver bullet. like I heard Paul talk that, you can't just take a psychedelic and expect, to be healed. And it's almost like that's the attitude that we've got now with SSRIs and the rest and SSNIs and all of those types of things that, oh yeah, I'll take an antidepressant and that's it. You've actually got to do the work, and it's not one thing, it's about holistically living. So, and that's what, psychedelics can provide you. It can provide these amazing insights or epiphanies or whatever term that you want to use. But if you don't actually incorporate them into your everyday life and actually help them to, during those critical periods of learning and those windows that are open for however long a period of time, then it's all for nothing. Like, you're just going to end up winding back in the same spot that you are. So whether that's through psychedelics or whether you're talking about just, your own personal mental health in general, like if you don't change your relationship to alcohol and, see a therapist and start actually eating healthier and exercising and doing all these types of things, then change isn't really going to happen. So it's not one thing, it's a holistic approach, and that's what health and well-being is. And I remember seeing your post a few weeks ago regarding, some of the most effective ways, to release anxiety. One of the first things that my psychiatrist taught me in the Melbourne clinic was, all right, I want you to write down 10 things that you're most happiest when you're doing. And these are your natural antidepressants. They're going to act so much quicker than a tablet. Most of the stuff on that list is free. You can access that right away. And it's, it's so true. I think sometimes we get caught up in spending thousands of dollars going on a health retreat, or, doing all this type, go and hug your kids, catch up with a mate, go for a walk, go for a run, go for a swim in the ocean, like all of these types of things that have such a profound impact on our well-being and our health and happiness that, we sort of neglect because we think that, we need to go, above and beyond and spend all this money, but sometimes the simplest things, are the best.
So well said, mate. It's like there's a lot of health spam out there to find the perfect routine. And then that itself becomes an industry and it just becomes all too hard. But mate, thank you so much today for sharing. I think a lot of people listening will relate to that as well. And I know people are searching, but it's really brave. And if you were to, if anyone wants to find out more, even for you to speak or those types of things, how do they contact you?
Yeah, look, I'm on generally LinkedIn's the best way to go. So just my name. I'm not on any sort of private setting or anything like that. But I think actually, one thing that I've always said as well when I do talk is that, it's one thing to go and talk to a psychologist who can tell you everything from a theoretical perspective.
Yes.
And this is getting back to your point about the therapist actually doing psychedelics. It's one thing to talk to a therapist who knows about it from a theoretical perspective, but it's one thing to actually talk to a person about sort of, lived experience. So I'm always happy to talk to anyone, who's struggling or, who might be experiencing depression or anxiety, because I've been there and you can actually practice proper, real empathy.
It's fantastic. Fantastic, mate. Thank you so much, buddy. Appreciate that. And Paul, thanks for coming in as well. I know you've been flying around everywhere at the moment as well, and obviously, you're in demand at the moment and thank you for doing such great work. I think, it takes courage even from a career perspective to start following some things that people might even perceive to be on the fringe, but to pioneer all of that and to be, such a statesman in regards to all of that is really appreciated. If people want to find out more, Paul, where would they kind of understand more about what Monash is doing? Is there any areas you can lead people to?
Yeah, sure. No, and thanks for inviting me, Ryan. Appreciate it and great to chat, Brock. It's a real pleasure. So you can find out about our work in my lab at monash.edu/psychedelics. And I think there's a bit of a shell of a site at clarionclinics.com as well. We'll hopefully be expanding that and able to open the doors this year. So that's another exciting venture.
And just to touch on that, so what does that mean when you open the doors? What will that look like?
So that'll look like the commencement of a referral and screening process and the opportunity to treat patients in a service delivery context with psilocybin-assisted therapy or MDMA-assisted therapy to start with. We're very fortunate. We've got a fantastic, built for purpose facility not far from here down in Abbotsford, right on the Yarra River. So I feel pretty fortunate to be able to contribute to that.
Fantastic, mate. Well, we'll make sure that we'll definitely share that when that's up and going. But, gents, thanks very much for coming in today. What a really good chat. It felt like we needed to crack a bottle of wine or something today, just to have a bit of a chat. But thanks very much, guys, for taking the time and coming in to Trainable.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. Awesome. Thanks for having us, mate.